Hi again, we're still multiplying fractions. This time we're going to be multiplying a fraction times a mixed number. This is one of the three ways you might be asked to multiply fractions. The first step when you're multiplying times a mixed number is to change that mixed number into an improper fraction. And hopefully you remember how to do that, but in case you don't, remember there's a video on this you can go back and watch if you need a refresher. All right, and then the second step after it's improper is to multiply. And the last step is to always simplify. All right, so here's an example of an improper fraction. Of a mixed number. I'm changing it to improper. I'm going to multiply and then add 3 times 2, 6. Add the 1 and get 7. The denominator is still 2. 4, 6 doesn't change. Now I multiply, step 2. 7 times 4 is 28. 2 times 6 is 12. Last step is to simplify, which means I'm dividing by a common factor, which in this case would be 4. So 28 divided by 4 is 7, 12 divided by 4 is 3. This is simplified, but it's still improper, so I'm going to divide top in, bottom out. 3 will go into 7 2 times. Subtract 6, I get 1, so my answer is 2. The 1 becomes my numerator, 3 is still my denominator. 2 1/3. All right, let's try it again. In this example, the parentheses, right, is reminding us that this is multiplication. I need to make this improper first, so 1/4 doesn't change, but 9 times 8 is 72, and I add the 4. 72 plus 4 is 76. Keep the 9. Because of this negative here, I'm going to attach the negative to 76, and now I multiply. 1 times negative 76 is negative 76. 4 times 9 is 36. I need to make this a mixed number, so I'm going to divide 36 into 76. It will go 2 times. 2 times 36 is 72. When I subtract, I get 4. So I'm going to write this as a mixed number. Remember, my answer should be negative, so I'm going to write a negative 2. That's my whole number. My numerator is 4. My denominator is 36. This looks good, except that this part's not simplified. These are still divisible by 4. So again, I have to make sure I include the negative with the 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 36 divided by 4 is 9. So negative 2 1/9. In this final example, there are 2 mixed numbers, so I need to change them both into improper fractions. 8 times 7 is 8, plus 7, 15 over 8. Because this is negative, I'm going to make the negative 15. Then I do the same thing on this one. 5 times 2 is 10. Add the 2 is 12 over 5. Again, this is negative, so I'm going to make my 12 negative, and now I need to multiply. I don't know what 15 times 12 is. I'm going to work that out. 2 times 5 is 10. Carry your 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. Start with a 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 1 is 1, and then add it up. So 0, 8, and 1. So this becomes 180. It's positive because a negative times a negative is positive. 8 times 5 is 40. I need to make this into a mixed number, so I'm dividing 40 into 180. It will go 4 times. 4 times 40 is 160. Subtract and get 20. So now my whole number is 4. 20 is my numerator. My denominator is still 40. This again can be simplified by 20. Divide by 20. So what I end up with is 4, and then 20 divided by 20 is 1, 40 divided by 20 is 2, 4 1/2. All right, the last thing you need to just be familiar with is what happens when you multiply a fraction by in different situations. All right, so the question is, will the product increase or decrease in the following situations? And we're supposed to assume that all the fractions are positive. So what that means is we're starting here with a fraction, and we want to multiply it by another fraction. And we want to know, is the first fraction going to get bigger, smaller, or stay the same? So if you had to guess, what do you think? A fraction times a fraction, is it going to get bigger or smaller? If you forget the answers to these questions, you can always just make up a problem and see what happens. I'm going to try 1/2. That's a fraction I'm familiar with. If I multiply it by, let's say, 1/4, then I would multiply 1 times 1 and get 1, and 2 times 4 and get 8. So what happened from 1/2 to 1/8? Did it get bigger or smaller or stay the same? Well, it obviously didn't stay the same. 1/2, think about half a dollar or half a sandwich compared to 1/8 of a sandwich. Which is bigger? Well, the 1/2 is bigger. So it went from 1/2 to 1/8. So when you multiply a fraction by something that's a fraction, then the product is going to decrease. All right. Think about a fraction times a mixed number. So again, what do you think is going to happen? If I multiply a fraction times a mixed number, is it going to increase, decrease, or stay the same? Well, let's try it. If I start with 1/2 again, and let's say I multiply by 2.5. Well, to multiply by a mixed number, I have to make it improper. So that's going to give me 1/2, and then 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5 over 2. 1 times 5 is 5, 2 times 2 is 4. If I change this back, 5 will go into 4, or 4 go into 5 once, the remainder of 1. So this becomes 1 and 1/4. So I started with 1/2, I ended with 1 and 1/4. Did that increase or decrease? Well, obviously 1 whole is more than 1/2, so this increased. All right, a fraction times an improper fraction. So let's start again with 1/2 and just see what happens. An improper fraction is when the denominator is the numerator is more than the denominator. So let's say I multiply it by 5 over 2. Then I get 5 over 4. We just did this one. That's why I chose it. It's 1 and 1/4. So what happened? You went from 1/2 to 1/4. Did it increase, decrease, or stay the same? Well, 1/2 went to 1 and 1/4. That's an increase. Okay, and really that makes sense because a mixed number and improper fraction are just two ways to write the same thing. So they should do the same thing, and they both show increase. All right, the last question is what happens when you multiply a fraction times 1? Well, is it going to increase, decrease, or stay the same? What do you think? Well, anything times 1, right, is the same. So it's true for fractions as well. It's going to stay the same. So think about this. When you multiply something times 1, it stays the same. When you multiplied something, a fraction times something less than 1, like 1/4, okay, it went down. So if you multiply something by 1, it's the same. If you multiply something by less than 1, it goes down. And if you multiply a fraction times something more than 1, a mixed number is always going to be more than 1 because it's a whole plus a little bit more. What happened? It increased. And that kind of makes sense too. So I'm starting with something. If I multiply it by something greater than 1, then I should get something larger than what it was to start with. Okay? So just be familiar. You may see a question about whether about one of these. And again, if you've forgotten, then just pick an example and try it and see what you get in order to answer the question. Otherwise, when you're multiplying with mixed numbers, just make them improper first. And then, as always, don't forget to simplify. Be careful with positive and negatives, and that's about all. All right, see you soon.